I walked out of that high-end restaurant and into the cool night air. But the war was not over. The silence that followed was heavier than the words spoken at that dinner table. My lie had served its purpose. It had exposed the naked truth about Veronica and Franklin, Simone's parents. They were people who measured dignity by a bank account and value by a price tag. But the real battlefield was back in their lives, and I knew the hardest conversations were just beginning for Marcus and Simone. My son Marcus had been pale, embarrassed, and ultimately liberated. For 35 years, he believed his mother was just someone ordinary, nothing special. A secretary, perhaps, struggling alone. That was the veil I chose to wear to teach him the value of hard work, not the corruption of inherited wealth. My $40,000 monthly salary was my secret weapon, not a trophy to hang on the wall. But the moment I dropped that black card on their table, the veil was ripped away, and Marcus had to face a truth more shocking than my income. The truth about the people he had married into. That night, as I sat in the taxi, I was perfectly fine, better than ever, but not victorious. I was just tired and sad. I confirmed something I didn't want to confirm, that some families are broken even if they have money, and that there are voids no bank account can fill. The shame of their parents was not Simone's fault, but her silence was her responsibility. She knew how her parents treated those they considered inferior, and she had done nothing to stop them. She was trapped between unconditional love for Marcus and blind obedience to her parents' control. My brutal honesty was the seismic shift she needed to find her own voice. I went home to my simple, modest apartment, my sanctuary. I put on my old, soft, familiar pajamas, drank my tea, and felt completely free. I had protected my peace and set my boundaries. I didn't just expose them. I liberated myself from the weight of pretending, of tolerating, of keeping silent. The next few days would be the true test of Marcus and Simone's marriage. Would they choose real love and freedom, or control and manipulation? The day after the dinner, Marcus called me. His voice was tired but resolved. He and Simone had talked for hours, confronting her furious and humiliated parents. Veronica and Franklin, predictably, resorted to emotional blackmail. They accused Marcus of being manipulated and Simone of being ungrateful, threatening to disinherit her and cut off all financial aid. This was the moment I had hoped for. Their threats were a final, desperate attempt to control their daughter with money, proving that they really believed their value, and their love, was in their wallet. Marcus had finally seen them for who they truly were, not as wealthy benefactors, but as people who despise others for not having the same things. He had laid down clear boundaries. No comments about money, no comparisons, no attempts to control their lives. His struggle was different from mine. I fought for financial independence. He was fighting for personal independence, for the right to build his life without an economic safety net or the worry that his parents-in-law wanted to impose. He finally understood why I had hidden my success. I needed him to be independent, to value effort, not money, and to fight to build his own life. The most profound realization for Marcus was about empathy. He confessed he felt foolish and blind for not seeing my struggle or the true character of Simone's parents. I reassured him that those feelings were not foolishness, but the seeds of empathy. Those are lessons money can't buy, I told him. He was learning to care, to worry about others. Lessons he could not have learned if he had been corrupted by my wealth from the start. His decision to set boundaries was his liberation. He lifted the weight of living under their expectations and control. He was choosing the right path. He was choosing love and values over financial manipulation. 3 days later, Simone came to my simple apartment. She was vulnerable, without makeup, and looked real. A stark contrast to the impeccable, cold woman I had met at the restaurant. She wasn't there just to apologize out of guilt. She was there to learn. Not as a daughter-in-law trying to look good, but as a woman trying to learn. She revealed the trauma of her childhood, her parents' poverty, their subsequent obsession with money as survival and security. She explained that she had stayed silent her whole life, accepting their control because they taught her that contradicting them was a betrayal. My lie, my brutal honesty had broken the chains of that control. Simone finally understood that love is not control, and family is not blind obedience. She saw that her parents' vast wealth had come at the expense of their peace, real connections, and authenticity. They were winning on paper, but miserable in spirit. She asked me to teach her how to live with dignity, how to be rich without needing to prove it, how to have peace in the midst of chaos. I told her I couldn't teach her, but I could share my experience. The path is not easy, but if she stays true to her values, she will find a peace that is worth more than any amount of money. The most important promise Simone made was for their future children, to teach them the value of people, not the price, to teach them empathy, humility, and kindness, things that don't cost money but are worth everything. This single commitment was her ultimate breakthrough, signaling the end of her parents' emotional legacy. The Centurion card, the Amex Black card, was more than a piece of titanium. It was a symbol of true, quiet power. I had dropped it on the table as a lesson, not a display. Franklin's cards were declined due to a temporary block for security. This fleeting moment of financial insecurity shattered his pride more than any direct insult, exposing the fragility of their wealth. My core lesson to them was simple and sharp. Money does not buy class. It does not buy real education. It does not buy empathy. I had built wealth and earned respect. They just spent money and tried to buy respect. They hid behind their money and jewels, but inside they were empty. The cab driver's wisdom reinforced this lesson. He, a man of simple means, observed that truly rich people don't need to prove it. He saw the difference between my humble clothes and my quiet power. His honesty, the honesty of a stranger, was the final confirmation that my actions were right. He taught me that honesty is saying things the way you feel them without masks, without lies, even if it hurts. I realized that my true wealth was not the $40,000 salary, the stock options, or the black card. It was the peace, this authenticity, this pure love for my son. That was a wealth that Veronica and Franklin will never learn. My lie was a necessary act of self-liberation. The story's conclusion is not about revenge, but about the reconstruction of boundaries and the triumph of values. My life returned to its simple, quiet routine, rising early, black coffee, walking up the stairs instead of using the elevator to stay active. I stopped pretending to be poor. I no longer needed to hide. I had seen what I needed to see and liberated what I needed to liberate. The confrontation with Veronica and Franklin was not the end of the family relationship, but the beginning of an honest one. I made it clear that I would see them at holidays, but I will see you differently. I will no longer wonder what you think of me. I already know. And they would live with the shame of knowing that I knew the truth about their disdain and condescending comments. The ultimate victory was the genuine connection with Marcus and Simone. Marcus had matured, learning to establish boundaries and understanding that love has no price. Simone had begun her journey to break the cycle of her parents' toxicity, choosing authenticity over appearance. At the end of the day, I looked in the mirror and felt proud. I was simply Alara, mother, executive, woman, survivor, fighter, rich in every sense that truly mattered. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The emotional fallout from the dinner party was a shockwave that reverberated through the families, and my mind, as the executive Alara Sterling, was already analyzing the competitive landscape. Veronica and Franklin, the in-laws, were not merely angry. They were in a state of contained rage and humiliation. Their carefully constructed image of superiority had been demolished not by a rival CEO, but by the woman they mocked as a poor and naive mother. Their fury was rooted in the loss of power. For years, they had used their money as a tool of control and manipulation. They controlled Simone with the threat of disinheritance and emotional blackmail. They controlled Marcus and Simone by paying for their down payment and honeymoon. They believed their money bought them the right to judge and dictate. My single, carefully planned act had exposed that their entire power structure was a facade. The Black Platinum credit card was not just a symbol of wealth. It was the wrong link in the chain that shattered their pretense. Franklin's public humiliation when his own gold card was declined was a masterful stroke of cosmic irony. The fear I saw in Veronica's eyes when she recognized the Centurion card was not the fear of losing money, but the primal fear of realizing that they had just scorned someone who has more than you will ever have. I knew they would seek revenge, not through financial war, but through emotional warfare. They would use every weapon in their arsenal. Emotional blackmail, furious accusations, and the desperate claim that they had sacrificed everything for Simone. This moment was the climax of the in-laws' dark comedy. They were rich in money, poor in spirit. My silence and simple life had made them feel powerful, but my truth made them feel empty. Their true punishment was not the dinner check, but the shame they now had to live with, knowing that the woman they despised saw them perfectly. The true class difference was never about the $80 steak or the $200 bottle of wine. It was about the fact that I had dignity and they only had bank accounts. The confrontation forced Marcus and Simone out of the shadows and into a crisis that would either break their marriage or forge it in fire. Marcus had to confront his own blindness and foolishness. He realized he had been unintentionally complicit in his in-laws' cruelty by allowing their behavior and assuming his mother was fragile. His most important action was not defending me, but standing up for his values. He and Simone chose to draw a clear line in the sand, setting clear rules. No more control, no more judgment, and no more financial manipulation. Simone's journey was the most complex. Her parents' obsession with wealth was a trauma rooted in childhood poverty, and she had internalized their belief that contradicting them was a betrayal. My honesty was the blindfold being ripped off her eyes. Her true shame was not that her mother-in-law was rich, but that she had seen every comment, every look, every disguised insult, and did nothing to stop them. When Simone visited my simple apartment, she wasn't seeking forgiveness. She was seeking a mentor. She wanted to learn how to live with dignity and how to be rich without needing to prove it. I told her the truth. That is learned by living, by making mistakes, by falling, by getting up. My guidance was merely to follow her internal compass, the voice she had silenced for years to please her parents. The conversation with Simone was the moment of reconciliation. She had a new resolve to break the cycle and to live a more honest, more authentic way. The true success of the entire ordeal was not my financial disclosure, but Simone's profound promise to teach her future children the value of people, not the price. She had chosen peace and authenticity over her parents' pressure and appearance. My philosophy of quiet wealth was built on the foundation of my own difficult journey. I wasn't born into fortune. I built it brick by brick, working 12 hours a day as a single mother, studying at night to become an executive. My wealth was earned, and therefore it carried dignity and respect. This quiet wealth afforded me the ultimate luxury, freedom and choice. I chose to live in a modest apartment, use the same leather handbag, and wear simple clothes, because true wealth isn't shown off. The simplicity wasn't an act of frugality. It was an act of defiance against materialism. I knew that the more one has, the less one needs to prove it. The encounter with the perceptive taxi driver was a powerful external validation of this philosophy. He recognized the look of someone who just said something they'd been keeping inside for years. He was a simple man with working hands, who understood that true wealth is not the size of the bank account, but the quality of one's peace, health, a son I love, work I am passionate about. He wisely noted that truly rich people don't need to prove it. His analogy of the pigeons eating the same bread, without inventing false hierarchies, was a spiritual checkmate to the Veronicas and Franklins of the world. They were too busy running, buying, competing, forgetting that, in the end, we all end up turning into dust. My wealth gave me the power to observe this universal truth from a distance, without being trapped in the competition. It was the power to help without showing off, the power of peace. Understanding the in-laws meant looking past their emerald green dresses and giant watches and seeing the scruffy feathers beneath. Simone's confession about their traumatic past explained, but did not excuse, their behavior. Their obsession with money was a shield against the fear of ever going back to that dark place of poverty, hunger, and death. This trauma does strange things to people. Their need to control their environment and everyone in it stemmed from a deep-seated insecurity. They needed to feel superior by making others feel inferior. Their condescending comments, their disdain, and their public display of luxury were all desperate attempts to validate their own worth. The revelation of my true status was not just a reversal of fortune. It was a psychological crisis for them. They could not comprehend that a woman who achieved their level of success could live without showing off or flashing jewelry. Their reality was challenged. They truly believed that their value is in their wallet. And when that wallet failed them, the declined card, they were humiliated and defeated. The most miserable people are often those who had the most because it was never enough. Veronica and Franklin were victims of their own success, dying slowly in their wealth by constantly accumulating, competing, and comparing. My actions, though harsh, were a necessary act of surgery to save my son and daughter-in-law from being infected by their spiritual poverty. The most profound realization from the entire ordeal was the unconditional cost of love. My love for Marcus demanded I sacrifice transparency for his independence. I needed him to fight, work, and value everything you achieved on your own, without the cushion of my millions. Hiding my wealth was the ultimate test of fatherhood, ensuring he grew up valuing effort, not money. He was not an heir. He was a person. This was the hardest part of my secret life. Marcus's love for Simone and his father-in-law's family had demanded tolerance and silence towards their cruelty. But true love, as I showed him, is with freedom, not with control, not with money, not with manipulation. His choice to hug me tightly and confront his in-laws was his declaration of unconditional love for the values I embodied, not the money I possessed. Simone's journey proved that love requires action, not just words. Her initial silence was a learned behavior of survival. Her true transformation began when she broke that pattern. Confronting her parents like that, choosing her husband and her new values over her parents' financial threats. Her tears of shame became tears of liberation. The greatest lesson I taught them was that love has no price. This was the truth that Veronica and Franklin, despite their travels and wealth, will never learn. My final act of love was to tell Marcus, you have to decide what kind of husband you want to be, what kind of father you want to be someday. I empowered him to choose the path of freedom and humility over the path of control and humiliation. My journey from being a pregnant minimum wage secretary who was completely alone to a director of operations managing multi-million-dollar budgets was the true core of the story. I was a survivor, fighter, rich in every sense that truly mattered. This legacy was not defined by the dollar amount, but by the 20 years of nonstop work of sacrifices you can't even imagine. The wisdom of the old woman in the park echoed this sentiment. It doesn't matter how much you have or don't have. What matters is how you treat others. That is the only inheritance worth having. My final simple message to Simone was, When you have children, teach them to see the heart of people, not their bank account. This was my testament, the unconditional love and dignity I was passing down to the next generation, ensuring my grandson or granddaughter would grow up valuing the right things. My life, with my simple phone, old canvas tote, and worn-out shoes, was my quiet power. It was the proof that one can be calm, not crying, not screaming, and still speak a powerful truth. My truth always brings peace, even if it hurts. My peace was my ultimate shield, a sanctuary I had earned and would protect with my new, hard-won boundaries. My walk to peace that Sunday morning after the dinner was the most symbolic act of the entire story. It was a liberation from the huge weight of pretending, of tolerating, of keeping silent. I had simply been honest. Finally, I looked at the illuminated city streets, recognizing that life was indifferent to personal dramas. The only thing that mattered was this moment, this peace, this honesty with myself. My final thought about Veronica and Franklin was one of pity, not hate. They had millions but enjoyed nothing. They just accumulate, compete, show off. Their void was one no bank account could fill. The message from Simone, apologizing and seeking guidance, was the final confirmation that my actions were not in vain. It was the beginning of her real journey, the journey towards authenticity. I looked at my simple, silent apartment. It was enough. It was everything. I didn't need more, and I never needed more. My honesty had saved my son's marriage and liberated my daughter-in-law. The taxi driver's departing words were the ultimate benediction. People like you, the people who speak the truth even if it hurts, are the ones who change the world little by little, one conversation at a time. I had created a legacy of dignity, and that was the truest form of wealth. The peaceful resolution of my walk was short-lived. Veronica and Franklin, the scorned and humiliated in-laws, were not capable of accepting defeat or shame. Their fury, now compounded by their financial embarrassment at the restaurant, metastasized into a desire for retaliation. They could not attack my moral authority, so they would attack my professional credibility and financial empire. They still believed money was the ultimate weapon, and they had enough residual capital and connections to cause significant damage. 1 week after the dinner, the first shadow fell. I received an urgent encrypted email from my corporate assistant, David. The subject line was cryptic. Urgent, security review initiated. David, who was one of the few people who knew the full scope of my quiet wealth and minimalist lifestyle, reported that a sophisticated anonymous smear campaign had begun circulating among the board members of my multinational corporation. The core of the attack was a calculated mix of truth and fabrication. It highlighted my unconventional lifestyle, the old apartment, the old car, the things they had mocked, and twisted it, suggesting it was proof of financial instability or unethical practices. The accusation was that a senior executive managing multi-million-dollar budgets who drives a beat-up sedan and lives in a third-rate building must be hiding money or engaging in tax fraud. The campaign was designed to exploit the corporate fear of risk and public image, especially for a director of operations overseeing 5 countries. I immediately recognized Veronica's vindictive signature. She was a master of managing their own investments and network. Franklin had major businesses and a wide network. They were leveraging their connections in the financial world to exploit my secrecy. They believed they were attacking the poor woman, but they were actually attacking Alara Sterling, the corporate power broker. The stakes had just escalated from family drama to a corporate war where millions, and my entire 20-year career were on the line. My reaction was not panic. It was a cold, calculated fury. The same cold, controlled rage, like a river under ice, I had felt at the dinner. They had chosen the wrong battlefield. While Veronica and Franklin were experts in small-time humiliation, I was an expert in corporate defense and market manipulation. My first move was to gather my closest team, David, my assistant, and Sarah, my private wealth manager. The internal campaign was moving fast. The board, fueled by rumors, had indeed initiated a security review. This was an attack on my dignity and integrity, the very things they lacked. I instructed David to halt the smear campaign by using hidden SEO gems and reverse search phrases to flood the search results with positive, validated data about my career performance, effectively burying the anonymous rumors. Simultaneously, Sarah, the wealth manager, initiated the most devastating counterattack. Franklin's major businesses were heavily reliant on a few key suppliers and a specific line of credit managed by a major multinational bank. A bank, ironically, where my corporation held significant sway and where I had personal relationships with several executive vice presidents. I instructed Sarah not to destroy them, but to apply pressure. The goal was to make them feel the suffocating control of true, deep financial power, the power that observes, not shouts. This was the final and most dangerous test of my philosophy. Could my quiet wealth and integrity prevail against their loud, desperate malice? My 20 years of sacrifice and building an empire, brick by brick, had prepared me for this very moment. They wanted to see me ruined. I would give them a taste of the consequences of disrespecting true class. The corporate counterattack was surgical and immediate. Within 48 hours, Franklin's main line of credit was paused for a routine security review, and 2 of his key suppliers suddenly became unavailable for new contracts. This wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of teaching a painful lesson in consequence and hierarchy. Franklin was a man whose entire identity was built on his immaculate gray suit and his giant watch, symbols of his perceived power. When his credit was paused, his pride and his business began to crumble simultaneously. He called Marcus in a blind rage, accusing him of treason and demanding he disclose my company's internal contacts. Marcus, however, was no longer the anxious boy from the restaurant. He was now armed with the lessons money can't buy. He calmly refused, reiterating the boundaries he and Simone had set. No interference, no control. He explicitly told Franklin, "I value my integrity more than your money." This refusal was the ultimate victory for my quiet education. Marcus had chosen dignity over dependence. Franklin and Veronica, desperate and cornered, showed up at my modest apartment unannounced, attempting a grotesque parody of an intervention. Veronica, no longer wearing her emerald green dress full of sequins, was now dressed in simple, though expensive, street clothes, an attempt to emulate my simplicity, a pathetic display of their lack of authenticity. Franklin, trembling, screamed, "You lied! You deceived us to ruin us! My company is suffering because of your petty revenge." I opened the door just enough to look at them directly, my voice as calm and firm as the day I revealed my salary. "I didn't ruin you," I stated clearly. "You chose your own ruin the moment you tried to buy my silence for $700 a month and called me a burden. Your company is suffering because it was built on arrogance, not integrity. And I only gave you a small taste of the real power you so desperately pretend to have." My attack was not about revenge. It was about teaching respect. Veronica, utterly defeated, finally broke. She didn't cry tears of repentance, but tears of rage and self-pity. She accused me of being cruel and vengeful, forgetting the humiliation she and her husband inflicted upon me. I decided the time for subtle lessons was over. I stepped out onto the small balcony of my apartment, making a final, decisive statement about class and wealth. "You believe class is a $200 bottle of wine and a tailored dress," I said, my gaze steady. "You are wrong. Class is knowing how to treat the person serving you dinner, regardless of their perceived status. You lost the right to talk about class the moment you calculated my worth at $700 a month." I revealed my final move. The security review at my company had been easily dismissed. The board, presented with my 20 years of clean audits and stellar performance, had laughed at the anonymous, desperate rumors. The rumor mill they started had failed because my career was built on substance and fact, While their attack was built on malice and unsubstantiated claims, I then offered them the ultimate counteroffer. I would call off the pressure on their businesses, the paused line of credit, the delayed suppliers, but only under two conditions. First, they had to write a personal, unreserved apology to me and, more importantly, to Simone and Marcus, acknowledging their controlling and humiliating behavior. Second, they had to attend a weekly, unmonitored family counseling session with Simone and Marcus for a period of 6 months, focused not on money but on communication and empathy. This was not a financial demand. It was a moral one. I was forcing them to invest their time and their ego, the two most precious things they possessed, into the spiritual health of their family. They had to choose between their shattered pride and the survival of their daughter's marriage. Cornered and facing financial disaster, Veronica and Franklin had no choice but to comply. The apology letter they produced was stiff, filled with corporate jargon, but the act of writing it was the first crack in their arrogance. I accepted their apology, called off the pressure, and within hours the line of credit was restored. Their business was saved, but their old way of life was over. The most crucial change was in Marcus and Simone. The crisis had revealed Simone's inner strength and authenticity. She had fully sided with Marcus, defending his choices and establishing a firm wall against her parents' toxicity. Their marriage, once built on the shaky ground of her parents' financial support, was now built on the solid foundation of shared values and mutual respect. Marcus, now fully independent, decided to quit his job and launch the startup he had been dreaming of for years, knowing he didn't need his mother's $40,000 safety net. He had learned to fight to work, to value everything he achieved on his own. My final meeting with Veronica was distant but respectful. She had lost her superior shine and gained a sliver of humility. She admitted softly that for the first time in decades, she didn't know what her life was about without managing investments. I simply told her, "Your life is about rebuilding dignity. Start with the counseling. Start with your son-in-law." I closed the door, walked to my simple sofa, and drank my tea. The war was definitively over. I had saved my son's independence, liberated my daughter-in-law, and taught a powerful lesson to two wealthy but empty souls. My quiet wealth had won. My peace was absolute.